They say there's a very special bond between a boy and his mother. And I felt that way for the first 14 years of my life, and then things changed. I was the youngest of 3 children, older sister Karen, middle brother Joel, and me, the baby. Karen and Joel had had another mother before my mother, and she passed away. And about 2 years later, my father met my mother, Fran. 2 years after that, they got married, and then I showed up. But I believe my mother felt the same way about all of her children. We were very affectionate. When we were young, she'd come in and go, "Half past kissing time, time to kiss again." And we'd all hug each other and kiss. And that was a theme for our family. Now, I should tell you that when I came into the world, we were doing all right. But my father, who became a prominent divorce lawyer, he started to do very well. And we moved from our little house on Menon Road to what I thought was a mansion on Shalimar Boulevard in Forest Hill. This was the upper part of Forest Hill for the nouveau riche. And because my dad was doing so well, my mom didn't have to work anymore. So she started to volunteer at the sisterhood and do charity work and play mahjong. And for me, this was a great time, not because of just our family there, because of our cottage in Crystal Beach. Every summer, we'd go to this place that was magical. It's about 90 miles outside of Toronto, across Lake Erie from Buffalo, New York. It's just a little community. But in the summer between 1930 and 1980, it expanded with all these Torontonians and Buffalonians. And when I think about it, if I could go back to one point in my life, it was when I was 11 years old in Crystal Beach, because everything was perfect. Other than having a great beach, it had an amazing amusement park. Now, there were very few houses and cottages at the beach, so usually it was about a 10-minute walk down there. Now, how it worked was at the end of June, our family would go out. My dad would work Monday to Friday and come out Friday night and go back Sunday or Monday morning, depending on how late it was. But eventually, my older brother and older sister went to camp, got jobs. So then it was Mom and me. We were alone together a lot of time. Half past kissing time, time to kiss again. My mom was very friendly with the man who owned Crystal Beach Park. I got to call him Uncle George Hall. After the beach, or at the end of the day, if Mom wanted a beverage, because my mother enjoyed a beverage, she would go with me down to the park. We'd see Uncle George. And Uncle George would put me on the bumper cars for an hour while they had a drink. And I just run and crash into people, and that's where I learned to drive, and that's why I don't have a license. But my mom, I put it this way, she was the definition of a great broad. And you can say that in those days. She really enjoyed a beverage. If you wanted to find the Ontario Provincial Police any Friday or Saturday night after midnight, come to our cottage, because my mom was pouring. And there was one time when she woke us up at 3 o'clock, her car had been stolen. She phoned the boys and they had it back in an hour. She was a fabulous woman that way and much loved. Now, I'm 12 years old. Everything seems perfect. My dad is driven in on a Friday night, and for some reason my brother and sister are there as well, and he calls a family meeting to tell us about a problem. Back then, before Pierre Trudeau was in office, there was only really one way to get a divorce in Canada. That was commit adultery. My dad, who had become a very prominent divorce lawyer, like other lawyers, had arranged for what was called a correspondent. This was a woman who would appear to have a relationship with the husband, but there was no stooping involved, just some suggestive photos at the Seahorse Motel. Because in those days, people didn't want it announced who they were having a relationship with, and some people didn't want to commit adultery due to religious reasons. Now, everyone looked the other way. The Crown attorneys, the judges, the police, no one cared because they knew the law was archaic. And then the CBC did a documentary called The Shady Lady Affair, talking about this process. And the government of Ontario decided to crack down. And my dad was there to tell me and my family that they chose him because he'd used 3 photos of the same woman in 3 different divorces, and he was going on trial. In September, front page of the Toronto Star with pictures. In October, they sentenced him. He was disbarred and was sent to jail. He was supposed to be there for 3 months. It was 6 weeks. And he came home and he was a little bit of a broken man. But what he tried to do, because of the level we were at, he tried to make the money back. But he also was spending the way he was when he had money, because we had to pay a lot of money in court costs and fines. And this got my mother and him into a lot of conflict because she wanted him to be more responsible, but he needed this. And you could see that things were pulling apart and there were fights in the family, and we ended up going for family counseling, and I didn't know what was going to happen. I'm 14 years old. It's Thursday, March 5th, and I'm sitting in the den with my brother and my Uncle Sid with TV dinners watching the movie The Day the Earth Stood Still at 6:30. My Uncle Sid had come into the family. My mother was the caregiver for her family. When her mother and father died, she moved my 19-year-old uncle into the house, into the guest room to take care of him. And for 5 years, he was an older brother, and he still thinks he is. So Sid and Joel and I are there, and I'd phoned my father in the afternoon to remind him because he loved this movie. And he said he hadn't felt that well, but he laid down, everything was good. We're in the den, I hear him come in the side door, but he doesn't come into the den, he goes upstairs. And he never comes down. He has a heart attack and he dies. And I start to blame my mother because of all the stress that she put on him. And about 3 months after that, one of my best friends gets killed in a bicycle accident. And at the end of December, the little girl I babysat for dies in a car crash. And I close off from everyone, especially my mother. I will not let anyone in, not let her in. And it takes me 2 years to finally open up to certain people, but not her. There's no more half-past kissing time, time to kiss again. There's no more feeling of any warmth. And that goes on for years and years. And she tries her best. When I'm getting my first house, she gives me $10,000 that she was going to put in the will, and she countersigned till I could pay for the whole house. And then I meet Viviane. Now, I had a dating habit of not necessarily following what Rabbi Kirschenblatt wanted, who told me it was a sin to court anyone who wasn't Jewish. And I remember bringing home Meredith Mary Claire Urquhart, my first real girlfriend, and my mother's comments was, well, she has lovely table manners. But I thought I'd have to bring Viviane home because I'd gone to some family functions. I still went to Passover and Rosh Hashanah, but that relationship wasn't there. And maybe in my mind I was thinking this would open up if my mother accepted Viviane. You see, Viviane was Miss Black Ontario. And in those days, it wasn't as commonplace as it was. And it was more commonplace in the theater and film and television world. And I brought her home, and my mother was very nice about it, but she said she was worried about us having children. And I said, don't worry about that now. And over a couple years, she got to know Viviane. And at one point, she said to me, you know, if you want to find a ring, I'll go with you. And maybe this opened me up a little more because she was now seeming to be accepting. It's April 1st. I've gone with a young guy who's going to be my brother-in-law to a very interesting theatrical venture called WrestleMania. And then after that, we go to my mother's and we meet Viviane there because Viv and I are going on our first vacation. We're going to Manzanillo, Mexico the next day. And we brought over steaks to put in the freezer because when we come home, we're going to have a barbecue. And I say goodbye to my mother. The next day, we get on the plane and we go to what Hotels.ca said was a 3-star hotel, but was nowhere near that. I mean, if you looked at what was available when you got down to the water, they had 2 paddle boats, and that was it. So Tuesday, we try to get on the paddle boat. Wednesday, we try to get on the paddle boat. We're too late to get one of them. Thursday morning, we get there at 10 o'clock in the morning, and there's 2 paddle boats. We get in one. Another couple of women get in the other. And the guy in charge of land sports and water sports, who's the bellhop, he says, don't go near that rock way out in the middle of the water. Go to the left, go to the right, but it's dangerous. And we go, yes. And Viv and I paddle left, and the two women paddle right, paddle. And it's getting 11 o'clock, and it's getting kind of warm, so we figured, let's get out of here, because we don't want to be caught in the hot sun. And we're paddling back, and we notice at the rock is an overturned paddle boat with the two women in the water. And me being the brave hero, I'm paddling over there, and I jump in the water, and me being an idiot, I don't realize there's sort of like an undercurrent, and it's taking us away from a resort. And Viv and I and the women, we get the paddle boat to a sort of a beach, which is right across from where we're staying, but pretty far away. And for the next 20, 30 minutes, we're waving, trying to call them over. And finally, two guys get in a motorboat, and they come over and they rescue us. Well, they rescue all the women, not me. One guy gets in the paddle boat, and I'm left to paddle on my own, paddling back in the hot sun. And I get there, and I am exhausted, and I'm hot. And I go up to the room, I relax, and then at 4 o'clock, we come down to meet with friends for aqua minerale. We're going back to the room to get ready for dinner. And because of the heat, I start to shake, and I shake, and I shake, and I get under the covers, and I'm shaking, and I stop. Everything's fine. I don't feel anything else. We go to dinner, and then afterwards it's game night, and Viv and I win pass the balloon up and down your body without using your hands contest, and we had a bottle of tequila, and we're going back to the room, and the phone's ringing. I go to the room, I pick it up, and they say, there's a long-distance call in the lobby. And I don't think anything about it. I go down to the lobby. I pick up the phone. I go, hello. My brother Joe goes, hello? I go, hello? Nothing. My sister picks up the phone. Brian, Mom passed away. I'm in complete shock. What happened? She had a heart attack. Have you talked to the rabbi? Yes, the funeral's Sunday to get you time to fly home. And then I asked the most important question of all. How's the dog? You see, the dog was my mother's favorite kid. I would come home before Vivian when I was working or doing something up north in Toronto, and I come to her apartment. She said, oh, if you want something, I can get it from the freezer. Meanwhile, she's making Sneaks a steak. I mean, this is where I was in the hierarchy. And I found out that the dog was with her boyfriend, and actually, later on, when I looked at the will, he got $10,000 to take care of her. That's how much my mom cared. So I said goodbye. The next day, I tried to fly, but there was no direct flight from Manzanillo to Toronto, so I had to fly to Los Angeles, stay over because we missed the connection, and fly the next morning. And I really didn't sleep, thinking about my mother, thinking of everything that happened. You see, my mom and I started to get even closer when Viv was doing a showcase in New York. And my mom and I flew down early. We went to a Broadway show. I dragged her to a baseball game. And all these stories and thoughts are going through my mind. But I really haven't come to the grips with that she's dead. I got back to Toronto. Now, when I landed in an airport, there was never anybody really there because I never got picked up. But I got off the plane, and there, when I got through immigration, was my Uncle Sid, my brother, and my sister. And I cried for the first time because I realized my mom had gone. At the funeral, I was allowed to do stories about my mom. Most of them were quite funny. I didn't talk much about her propensity to enjoy an alcoholic beverage, but I did say that her ideal boyfriend was the last one she was with because he was a liquor salesman, and that every year she got a thank you note from the LCBO. So I shared those kinds of stories. So I get to the Shiva, and I'm talking to my Aunt Sheila. My Aunt Sheila tells me when my mom was feeling ill, she didn't want to go and buy an ambulance. She phoned my Aunt Sheila, so my Aunt Sheila drove her to the hospital. I don't know if she had trouble parking, but all I know is that my mom came in with Aunt Sheila, and they're wheeling my mom into the emergency, and she's like kibitzing with the guys, the attendants, and telling Sheila that she should have a rye and water when she gets out. And then I find out the time of death of my mother, which was exactly when my body was shaking in Manzanillo, Mexico. Some people can think it's the heat, but I think it's that bond I talk about. The bond I had with my mother, half past kissing time, time to kiss again. Thank you.